Hi, my name is Hunter Gates, and today we're going to be talking about limits for my math project. So let's talk about the history of limits. The discovery of calculus is often attributed to two men, Isaac Newton and Gottfried Leibniz, who both independently developed its foundations in the 17th century. Now, both mathematicians discovered calculus. How does that relate to limits? Well, limits are the foundation of calculus. So if we didn't have limits, we couldn't use calculus. So both mathematicians had to have limits to derive all the calculus we know today. Alright, now we know the history. What is a limit? So a limit tells us the value that a function approaches as that function's inputs get closer and closer to some number. And the idea of a limit is the basis of all calculus, as stated earlier. So the formal definition of a limit is written as this: limit of some function as x approaches a would be equal to L. So let's talk about limits in calculus. So if f of x becomes arbitrarily close to a single number, L, as x approaches c from either side of the function, the limit of that function as x approaches c is L. So here's some examples. So if we graph the function the limit of x squared minus 1 over x minus 1 as x approaches 1, we get this graph shown here to the right. Now if we plug in numbers close to 1, plug in numbers in x close to 1, we get values close to 2. Not exactly 2, but close to it. But if we plug in the actual value 1 in, we get a math error because there is a hole, quote, in the graph, and that hole is the limit that we're trying to find. Well, limits in everyday life. Limits can be used in every day and not just calculus. There are limits in a lot of things in our daily lives that we just don't notice. So, here's some examples. Ice melting in a glass of water. As the ice melts, it gets closer and closer to room temperature as time equals infinity. And here's some more examples. Say you accidentally drop an egg on the ground. You could find the limit as the egg gets closer and closer to the ground before it actually breaks on the ground. Now, you may not want to find the velocity of it or even think about math in these situations or any other situations. But in reality, calculus is used in a lot more things than we realize. So, to sum it all up, basically two guys came up with the idea of calculus, and a limit is the basis of all calculus and is defined as when the value of some function as its inputs of that function get closer and closer to some number. Now, this idea is not only used for calculus, but for applications to everyday life instances, as we discussed earlier. And here's my works cited page for all of you that want it. And of course, Professor Kellum, obviously, for introducing and explaining limits. And that concludes my presentation. I hope all who watched this found it to be somewhat interesting and informative, but I hope I didn't bore you to death. But yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you all later.